Today we're back out in the shop. We're working on a 1932 Ford Highboy Roadster. It's a So-Cal Speed Shop Roadster, and it's having a mechanical fuel pump issue. It's running, but it's running low pressure. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and replace the fuel pump. It's the USMW 16560. Let's get started.
But first, let's look at the application of the parts we're using and some safety tips to keep in mind before starting.
First things first, we want to make sure the battery's disconnected. We're in a well-ventilated area. Let's start taking the fuel lines off. So I'm just removing this AN fitting up here and removing the whole entire hard line here from the fuel pump to the carburetor. Then I'm going to go ahead and remove the feed line, fuel feed line. It's just hose clamps, so we'll take a nut driver here, loosen these clamps. So when you're disconnecting the feed line, let's make sure you have a catch tray underneath to catch some of the fuel, and then we'll use a bolt or something to plug up the line. Before we loosen the bolts on the fuel pump itself, this bolt up here in the front of the engine, front of the block, basically this is just a plug. If we take this plug out and we put a longer bolt in, sometimes we can use, if you don't have other bolts, it's a 3/8/16 bolt that is used to mount the actual fuel pump. So we put a longer bolt in here, and we just want to screw this in until it hits the push rod. We do not want to over tighten it. We're just trying to get it to hold the push rod. So basically off the cam, there's a push rod that comes and hits the arm on the fuel pump. This will actually hold the push rod in place so that we can remove the fuel pump and we don't have the push rod come out. So let's go ahead and take the fuel pump off now. Then we'll want to go ahead and we'll get a gasket scraper and make sure this surface is perfectly clean before we go ahead and put the new one on. We'll just get all this gasket material off the old flange. When we're getting the gasket material off here, we just want to make sure there's something inside the block to make sure none of the debris goes inside the engine. So I like to use some sort of sealant on the gasket surfaces. I'm using a gasket cinch, but you could use Permatex or any other brand. With this, we just want to get the surfaces wet, and then we let them tack up. We can also do the surface of the fuel pump. We want to wait a few minutes here, let them get tacky, and then we'll put them onto each other. We'll mate the surfaces. After that, we'll do the other side and mate the surfaces of the actual vehicle. Now that it's tacked up, we can put the gasket on the surface of the fuel pump here. And again, we'll put gasket cinch on both sides and the block so that all surfaces are coated. We'll let this tack up, put some on the block, and start installing the fuel pump. Okay, we're just getting the fuel pump here mounted. The arm is below the push rod. Just getting one of the bolts started here. Hand tighten this bolt just so it can hold the fuel pump in place. And then we'll go ahead and put the other bolt in. You want to make sure you snug up each side before tightening completely. That way it's centered on the rod. Now we'll go ahead, we'll remove this bolt for the push rod. Put some silicone on the plug and get that bolt right back in so it's all plugged up, there's no oil leak, and obviously the push rod will be free from any interference. Okay, we'll get this bolt out. We're going to take the original plug that was in the block, which is just a 3/8/16 bolt, We'll put a little silicone on it and put it back in. Now we'll go ahead and hook the fuel lines back up. Okay, so we'll just snug these up here. Get those nice and snug. And the only thing left, we'll hook up our feed line and we're ready to roll. Okay, we got our fuel lines attached, our main feed line attached. We're all snugged up on our fuel pump. I think we're ready to start it. Now that we got our fuel pump installed, let's get our battery reconnected. So the carburetor float bowls already had fuel in it, but if you do need to prime the fuel pump, disconnect the coil wire, crank it over several times, let it build pressure. We're already good to go. Let's give her a rip. Okay, now that it's running, you want to go back through, check all your fittings, check for leaks, make sure everything's good to go, and then take it for a road test.
On this and other US Motorworks products, visit us at usmotorworks.com.